got a bidet! Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're talking about the most recent episode of Andor. I believe it is episode 7. We're kind of getting over where we were with the heist and trying to see where is this series going. And this episode kind of sets us up for at least some interesting things moving forward. There was a lot to unpack as far as what was being said and between a handful of characters, so we're definitely going to dive into that. But we're going to go ahead and tell you what happened in the episode, and then we will go ahead and tell you our opinions of the episode. So we're going to start it off. We actually opened this episode with, I got his name this time, and I believe it's Cyril. I kind of think of it as Sarah, but with an L instead of an H. So we got Cyril and his mom. He is kind of getting ready to go to his first day on his new job. His mom is kind of commenting on what he's wearing, like, is that what you're wearing to your new job, kind of a thing. But there is a really cool thing that I noticed when we open with this shot. We see his bedroom, and he's got like these little like Star Wars action figures. And thinking about it, it didn't occur to me at first, but then it's like, well, back when like Vietnam War and stuff like that was going on, there was GI Joes, and people had people that represented the soldiers of the country. And so that's kind of like in this case, he has soldiers of the Empire. So I thought that was super cool. But yeah, they talk about him going to his first day of work, and then right at the last part of this little scene, he sees more news on their version of a television of the Empire investigating these different random bad things that are happening in the world, or galaxy, I should say. Then we kind of cut over to the Empire. We get, like this round table shot that they've had quite a few times. And they're discussing how they can better control the society. They're talking about putting more regulations on everybody, including higher taxes. It is said that Palpatine has specifically said that the ISB will be taking the lead in security. And then there's also going to be an emergency Senate calling so that they can basically make it so that they can have access to security systems way easier than in the past. We can see, throughout this show already with our character, you may hear her called Dedra. You might hear her called Mira. It's the same person. We figured that out in this episode. How she's been kind of getting these records behind the scenes without people noticing. And basically something like this would become more acceptable out in the open after this emergency hearing. Another big thing that was mentioned from this gathering was that all prison sentences would be re-evaluated, and all fines must be paid in full at the time. So the Empire is basically sensing that there is something going on with a rebellion. So they're trying to make people feel like they're more confined and more like pinched into a corner when it comes to the control of the Empire. We also get some stuff. What's that?
Ruling with fear.
Exactly. Trying to make sure that the rebels fear their government as opposed to thinking that their government works for them. We also see that Mira continues to look into some of the issues that she's been looking into in previous episodes, further under the radar. We get a little bit of that at this point. But another big thing that happens in this episode is we see Luthen talking to Mon Mothma. And this is taking place at the antique shop. The driver is outside, and Mothma goes inside as if she's looking for some more antiques to buy. But what we get from this couple talking to one another is that Luthen wants to be way more aggressive with this rebellion than Mothma. She's basically like, I heard about this thing that happened. Was it you? And, he's like, well, duh, it was me. And so there's kind of this dynamic of trying to be more in the open and aggressive about it from Luthen's point of view, but there's also we're not ready yet to, go full fledged and take on this empire as a rebellion from Mothma. She's trying to gather resources more and more on the secret end, as opposed to like Luthen, who's gathering some not good attention to their rebellion actions with him stealing all the money. Well, at least his group stealing the money, I should say. So we kind of get to see, they're even though they're on the same side, they definitely disagree in certain ways. Then we cut back to Cyril. He is now actually getting his orientation at work. So he's like walking through the just massive, massive work area. It's kind of like a huge open room, and everybody has their own desks. It's like the Empire's version of cubicles, so to speak. Um, we get to see something I'd say cool. It's like a nice little Empire touch. We see a mouse droid go through on the floor as Cyril like dodges out of the way from it. But one of the big things here is that the place that he's working for is known as the Bureau of Standards. So he essentially watches over a system and then monitors what's going on. Then we cut to something that's pretty interesting. I didn't really catch her name at all, but we see this woman. She's dressed in red, and she is getting off kind of like a train or tram, so to speak. And she's walking through the city of Coruscant, or the planet Coruscant, and she eventually meets up with Vel, who was the woman leader from the heist from a couple or from the last episode. And basically, the dynamic that is happening between these two is that this mysterious woman wants Andor killed. Basically, he was a hired mercenary, so he's not technically one of us, but he knows about us. So she wants to get rid of Andor. Whereas Vel doesn't necessarily have the same feelings, so they kind of have this again, headbutting within the same system, even though they're trying to accomplish the same thing. So I bet we see more of this woman in the future, the one that was dressed in red. I'm curious to see how their dynamics play out. Then we get to see it cut back to Mira, and she is basically talking to a not so competent worker of the Empire. When she approaches him, he is sleeping on the job, but she's telling him that, hey, I need these reports done on some security information. And he's like, which planet? And she goes, all of them. And so you can tell that he's like, oh crap, I got a lot of work ahead of me. But she specifically tells him to deliver the information to her and her alone because it is confidential. So we can definitely see that she's still, doing some shisty things within the Empire. We get a very, very small clip of Cinta, which is the woman that was left behind during the heist. And she's kind of gone back to her normal life with her little group in the forest. But she sees this massive Star Destroyer go across the sky, which is implying that there is a heavier Imperial presence coming to her planet. Probably one of the most significant parts of this episode happens next, and that is when Andor returns home. He just came off of this heist and he got his cut, and so, thinking of family, he goes back to his planet where he was living before, and he's wanting to, take his adoptive mother with him. And when he gets to the house, basically she's telling him no. Obviously he doesn't understand why. I have all this money. we can get away from this, especially since her planet is little by little gaining more and more imperial attention. Um, but her point of view is that she wants to stay back at her planet and she wants to fight for the rebellion when the time comes on her planet. She doesn't want to abandon her home, so to speak. So even though Andor, lets her think about it for a little bit, and he goes off and he talks to his friend Bix, which was the woman that was dating the dude that turned Andor in way back in the first arc of the show. He goes back and sees her, pays off debts to the people from around the planet that he has debts for. Then he goes back to talk to his mom again to see what her final thoughts are. She still tells him no. So basically, Andor is leaving this planet empty-handed as far as, friends or family, but he's making sure to have closure to a bunch of different people, whether it was his adoptive mother telling him, no, I'm not going to go with you, or saying bye to Bix and making sure that the people he owed money to gets their money. Um, However, one other little small tidbit that happens before he leaves the planet is we see this flashback and we actually find out what happened to the real Clem. I say that because he was going by the name Clem when he was doing the heist, but Clem was his adopted father. And what we see is a flashback to when the Empire was first coming through their planet. We can kind of tell that based on the clone armor that the stormtroopers have. It's way more resemblant of the prequel armor than it was the original trilogy. And essentially, he spoke out and did treason to the Empire. So he was hanged in the streets. And he was murdered by the Empire for his opinion. Then we're going to cut back to Mon Mothma. She is having a dinner party or is at a dinner party, and she runs into an old classmate from, back in the good old days. And it's very interesting the way that this scene plays out because both of them are not having the popular opinion of the Empire, and they're both making it very, very prevalent that that's what's going on. But they can't say that, obviously, because if someone hears that, then they can be turned in for, again, treason. So they're kind of doing like this dance of words around each other of like, you know, I can't tell you my political opinion because you're not going to like what I have to say, but they're both saying the same things. They're kind of getting the hint that they're both part of the rebellion. Uh, I thought it was kind of interesting how they were doing that. It kind of reminded me of like, when you tell somebody something bad happened to you and they're like, oh, that's nothing. This happened to me. And then you go back and you say, oh, no, this is bad. That's kind of the dynamic of what they were saying. Like, my opinion is really not what you want to hear. So I'm not going to tell you. And then the other person's like, well, mine's even worse. So I'm not going to tell you what's happening. So it was a weird, like I said, like a dance of words going around the subject, and that's how it played out. Ultimately, their conversation is cut short because Mothma's husband says that there's some more guests there to see her, so he pulls her away from that conversation, and then we move on. We do see another Imperial meeting, like around the round table, and they're discussing normal matters, but the leader of the group looks over to the lieutenant supervisor Blevin and is like, "You've been a little on edge today. Uh, what's up?" And he basically says, that Mira or Dedra is doing some weird things behind the scenes, and she's basically put on stand, in front of all these higher ups of, she's being shisty, and so she explains herself and convinces this dude that's running the meeting that what she is doing is, for the good of the empire. And what turns out is that he basically grants her the ability to do what she's doing, but not having to hide it so much anymore, just because he's so impressed. But the biggest thing I think coming out of this scene is he says at the end of the discussion in front of everybody is to take a walk with me. And as they're leaving, he tells her, watch your back. Um, just because, what she's doing clearly isn't what everybody wants her to do, like Blevin. And so she has to watch her back in the Empire. We got two more things that are pretty big in this episode. One is that, we saw Andor leave his previous planet empty-handed with friends and family, and he goes to the planet. I want to say it's pronounced Niamos or Nemos. It looks like I don't know, it probably looks like LA or California, but in Star Wars world. But we see him in a room. There's a woman that wakes up on the bed, assuming, it's just whoever he hooked up with the night before. It doesn't really have any sense that they know each other, especially since she's calling him by a different name. I think she calls him Keith. So he's not being honest with her of who he is. And also, he's using the noise of the shower and saying that he's taking a shower to be able to rummage through her things and steal from her. So clearly, they're not friends. It's just whoever he was with. But
That's
one
not
key,
how I interpreted that.
what's that?
I said that's not how I interpreted that.
How did you interpret it?
I think it's his things that he's hiding from her.
Hmm. Oh, I could be wrong in that. We'll have to see how that stuff plays out in the future. Um,
Anyway,
Yeah. So after he leaves being with her, then there's these people running through the streets, and right away it reminded me of Aladdin. So I was like, are we gonna get some sort of Aladdin running through the street scene going on here? But there's a shore trooper that is running after this group, and Andor is gracefully walking, and he tries to divert away from the guys that are actually running by going up some stairs. Like if the people are going down the beach front, he takes some stairs to go away from the beach, so to speak. And he eventually runs into another shore trooper, and basically what's happening here is that the shore trooper is assuming that he was part of those people running around, so automatically he's guilty, even though he's claiming, I'm a tourist, I'm not a part of it, I'm trying to go to the store, which was right next to where they were. This trooper isn't having any of it. And so we get to see the K2SO type droids appear here. um, I can't remember what they're technically called, maybe K2 series, but we see how they kind of take things literal, like they did in Rogue One, where I think the shore trooper says something like, hang on to him or hold on to him to make sure Andor doesn't get away, and the droid like chokes him out on the wall because he's hanging on to him. So we kind of get that funny little thing there. But Andor does get taken into Imperial custody and is charged with 6 years for his crimes that he did, air quotes, because he was just picked up off the street from it. So we end it there for Andor's part of the episode, and then there's like a 30-second clip of Cyril looking through some databases at work, and he kind of like glances up as if he's looking at possibly where the managers are, or just making sure he's not being watched by a camera. We don't really know because it doesn't show us what he's looking at, but it appears that he's maybe using this system for his own personal needs as opposed to actually doing the work that he's supposed to be doing, because we're building his character arc little by little, uh, hopefully towards an encounter with Andor by the end of this show, or season one, I should say. So that about wraps up the episode. Sarah, what did you think about it?
that is also not how I interpreted that scene, but that
No?
makes way more sense than what I was thinking. I just thought it was just him looking at the screen.
Oh.
But I would not be surprised if he's using it for his own personal gain. That seems very much his personality to do that. I thought it was kind of weird that that's what they ended the episode on.
Mhm.
It seemed like when Cassian got his sentence of 6 years, that was kind of like a clean break point of where I would have ended the episode. So to have that little snippet seemed kind of out of place.
Yeah, like
Um,
when they were, I guess they keep track of the crimes on these like little cards. I could have seen the episode end when she goes like, and then it cuts out, kind of a thing.
right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was a lot better than most of the episodes so far, I think, in my personal opinion. I was actually more engaged in this episode. It seemed like more of the scenes had purpose, which is one of the things that I've been really struggling with lately, is that a lot of the scenes just seem kind of random and thrown in and not really leading to anywhere. And I feel like a lot of the scenes in this episode actually led to somewhere. We got something from it. So I was happy to see that it wasn't just kind of filler content, which is how I felt most of the season has been so far. Um, there were a couple little things that I wanted to touch on that I thought were kind of neat or interesting. One being the interaction on the beach scene, the are you a part of it? When he was talking to Cassian, thinking he's a part of whatever those guys running away are, and he's like, a part of what? He's like, don't ask questions. But it's like it's a showing the miscommunication of like he doesn't even know what he's a part of, but the other guy just thinks he's being a smart aleck, like, stop trying to trick me. I know you're in on it. And just the accusatory nature of the Empire. So I thought that was kind of neat to see more on that side of things. And kind of going along that same realm, one of the table talks, as you were talking about in the Empire, I forget his name. The guy that was accusing Dedra.
11,
Hmm?
11.
Yeah, so he said something about, can you imagine if everybody was as careless as she was and just totally disregarded the rules? And he said it with some different words, but that's basically what he was getting at. And the guy in charge is like, that's a good idea. What if we all just disregarded the rules? And it's just one of those things of like, like, all right, this is where we're starting to see things actually turn into the empire that we know it to be. And, just playing dirty and not playing by the rules and just kind of doing whatever it takes to get to whatever answer you need to prove that you're correct. And, so I just the it was kind of like a one or two liner, I guess, if you will, but I thought it was a really neat interaction for us to be able to see. I felt like it was really well done for such a short scene. Um, but I feel like from that little tiny piece, you can take away a lot of the intent behind the Empire from that. So I thought that was pretty cool. Um, I think the interaction between Andor and his mom was kind of weird, but also kind of cool. And I remember when we were watching it, I was telling Jeremy, like she's up to something. Something's not quite right with her. And I couldn't tell because it's like the nighttime scene, and then it's like the next day, like the morning of, because she says she's tired and needs to go to bed. So I didn't know if she was like wanting to turn him in, which didn't really make sense to me, but I knew something was wrong and I just couldn't figure out what it was. And so then the next day, when she says she's part of basically wanting to be part of the resistance, it made a lot more sense to me. Um, but I think I'm predicting something bad is going to happen to her. I think she's going to get taken out by the Empire somehow, some way, and he's going to use that as his like internal fuel to join the resistance or something along those lines and try to, because we know he somehow tries to help more, right? Like
Hmm.
that's the ultimate end of this show, is that he becomes more with the resistance. Um, I think she's gonna have to die to give him some more inspiration, because right now he's just thinking, I got all this money, I can just live the good life out here on the beach. Um, well, except for the fact that he's in jail now. But um I'm predicting her death and not too far out from now. Um, I'm curious what the situation was with Bix. How did you interpret that?
With Bix,
Because she seemed like annoyed that he was there and like she just didn't want anything to do with him anymore. But they were really good friends, and I believe ex-boyfriend, girlfriend from Once Upon a Time.
I think,
Like they have a history together, but she seemed to want nothing to do with him.
I think she's upset that, he was kind of like the reason why this all happened. And, clearly, her boyfriend was killed because of, um, in their eyes, Andor's actions. Um, so I'm sure she has some sort of like really strong love-hate relationship with him because of that. But at the same time, the dude brought it on himself. So, I mean, I don't know how she can't also see the guy's own stupidity from what he did. So I think it's a little bit of all that, but I think she's all also uh, surprised to see that he came back and paid off all his debts. Because we did see in a couple of episodes, when he's walking through the streets, a couple of people walk up to him saying, where's my money, kind of a thing. And all of a sudden, he has all of it for these people. I think he said this should cover it and maybe a little more or something along those lines. So I think it might be a little shocking to her to see, you know, the person that she saw leave the planet and who's there now with her. That could be, her trying to process, like, what the heck? My boyfriend's dead. What happened to you? Um, it kind of reminds me of like the Lion King when Nala finds Simba in the forest and she's just blown away of who he's become, knowing where he was from. So, uh, my guess is it's kind of that dynamic.
That makes sense. What were some of the other parts that you liked or didn't like?
Well, I will say from the get-go, kind of like how I said in the recap, one of my favorite parts was seeing like the little GI Joe type stormtroopers. We actually, I paused the screen to go up there and look at them closely to make sure that's exactly what it was. And sure enough, it was. I think one of them was in like a clone armor, probably in that armor style as the flashback that we saw in this episode. Um, Basically you could see the outlines of the troopers and the color, so you could see it was white armor. You could see it was stormtrooper armor. But because it had like a little flat piece up top, that's why I think it might be like an early version of the stormtrooper, and then plus a couple modern ones. So I thought that was kind of a cool touch to the episode. um, it was a way to relate it to how things are in our world, because like I said, back when GI Joe was popular, it was the same thing. I really liked the interaction between Luthen and Mothma, just because I felt that was a very strong scene to show that even though they're on the same side, they definitely differ. I like how Luthen is more aggressive, but at the same time, I can understand why Mothma is concerned about that, because if you just jump right in, there's a good chance that by being exposed to the Empire so early on without as much resources as she wants to have, that could ultimately squash them. So uh, I'm curious to see how the way they play off each other progresses in the show.
I
Um,
feel like she's probably also unhappy that he didn't run this by her, but he didn't
yeah.
run it by her because he knew she wouldn't approve. So to see that they're not on the same page anymore in that aspect, I think was a big um, shock to her.
What's that saying where it's like ask for forgiveness later, or I don't
Don't
remember.
ask for permission now, ask for forgiveness later.
Yeah, that's what he was doing. Um, One thing that I was hoping to see in this episode, but ultimately did not see, they made reference to the Emperor and that there was going to be this emergency Senate meeting about, the different topics that they were talking about. And I was really hoping to see the Emperor talking to the Senate and discussing these matters. And I feel like we're not going to get that, simply because we could see some of the things that they were talking about being carried out by the end of the episode. Like you said, I don't know if you said it on here yet, but you definitely said it when we were watching. that uh, we heard about them talking about extending the prison sentences, and by the end of the episode, she was like, "Oh, it used to be 6 months, and now it's 6 years." So I don't know if we're gonna quite get what I'm looking for out of that. But it was kind of cool to hear the Emperor at least referenced. Like he is still a living being in the show, but he's just kind of off screen, so to speak. Um, and I
I
do,
wonder, oh, what I was gonna say is I wonder if we're gonna see some sort of like super cool, empowering um scene with him at the end, kind of like we did at the very end of Rogue One with Darth Vader. You didn't get very much of him, if any, throughout the movie, but at the end when he's just going through the tunnel, not like
yeah.
not like we're gonna see the same thing with Emperor Palpatine, but just something, cool or exciting at the end.
Well, I would say I don't want to be, I don't want to go down a crazy rabbit hole or anything like that, but I do think it would be pretty cool, like kind of going off what you said, is what if the Emperor was in like a secret meeting or a small meeting with some of these characters that were new in this season, and uh, he just kills them all with like force lightning or something. They'd all have to die because then he could keep, what he is in secrecy. um, but I don't know, that would be crazy. I do remember there's concept art that shows royal guards, which could imply that we might see him, but I mean, I wouldn't count my chickens yet. So, um, I still remember during Star Wars Celebration, Ian McDiarmid, who is the actor for the Emperor, he mentioned that we should expect more of feeling that he's around as opposed to seeing that he is around. Now, he did say that before we saw him in Kenobi, spoilers. But I don't know. Maybe we'll get something as small as we did in Kenobi, and that'll be it. But I do wish we saw more of how the Empire, plays things out in the Senate, because I do think when they started, they tried to, be appealing to the eyes of everybody and, try to show that he is making a more secure galaxy. But as we saw in this episode, where the guy was, like you said, mentioned, well, why don't we try, you know, doing things that aren't normal or whatever, however they rewarded it. And maybe that is how it, snowballed into being what it's known in the original trilogy. So I think we'll just have to wait and see. This definitely was kind of like a bridging the gap type episode, I would say, because not only are we done with the heist, but Andor is moving on from his adopted mother. He's moving on from his friends. And so he's going to find his new place in the world. Unfortunately, it might start in a prison cell. But knowing who he is, there's probably a good chance that he'll be able to find a way to get out. Um, Oh, one more cool thing I forgot to mention. It's very, very small, but when Andor was running through not running, he was walking through the streets and he was kind of like just looking around. We saw these like security droids fly above him. And I'm pretty sure that's the same type of droid if you've played Battlefront 2 and you play through the campaign, the main character has like a security droid that goes on her back and takes off every now and then. I think it is the same type of droid. Um, I wouldn't put it past it that that's a nice little plug-in for them, but I thought that was neat. Anything else for you on this episode?
I did have one other thing that I forgot to mention, which is the antique shop scene. So you've got Luthen and Mon Mothma talking about, the heist and how they have their different opinions on it and whatnot. The driver's outside, so he can't hear, but Luthen's assistant is like in the back room. But the way they show her viewing their conversation, um, I think she can still hear everything that's going on, even though she's not really in their view. She's like watching from behind the back room. So when Mon Mothma leaves, the assistant tells Luthen, I hope she's worth it. And so she just seems like she's not really on the same page as Luthen, maybe. Whereas, previously we saw her distracting the driver, so we know she at least knows some of the stuff that's going on with Luthen because he trusted her enough to like, hey, when he comes in, you have to distract the driver or whatever. So we know she has an idea of what's going on. This is showing more that she knows, I think, pretty much everything that's going on. Whether or not Luthen quite knows how much she knows, or if he's still hiding stuff from her. Um, it's a relationship that we don't know all of about, or everything about it. And I feel like she might be up to something too. Um, either she doesn't trust Mon Mothma or she wants to somehow sabotage something, or maybe it's just me because I'm not sure who to trust in this series because everybody has all these secret agendas. But she might be somebody to watch out for too. So,
Yeah, I mean, money can sway you. So if she finds out she can turn them in for some cash, I can see that. You did remind me of one quick thing. I don't think I mentioned it in the recap, but when Mothma was talking with her old school friend, she told him that the driver that she has going around with her was planted by the Empire, hoping to hear more about the rebellion, so to speak. It's not that the Emperor is knowing that she is a part of the rebellion, but he is suspicious of things happening. So that driver was specifically assigned to her to basically listen in if anything crazy comes up. So we do know that something is up with the driver because earlier on she was mentioning how it was a new driver, um, and they really kept emphasizing that it was a new driver. But now we actually have some closure to why uh, she keeps saying that stuff. But sounds like that about wraps up the episode for us. So make sure to check out the episode for this week. We are, going into the second half of the show, being on episode 7 of 12. But if you enjoyed our discussion, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop us a like if you liked the video and drop us a comment letting us know your thoughts and opinions on the episodes. And then, as always, everybody, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.